pause and bring her up to speed.
Yep.
Are you ready? This meeting of the Cable Franchise and Hearing Board is now called to order. And, this meeting is now called to order. Have you had a chance to review the minutes?
I did,
And I have also. I move that we approve the minutes from July 16th meeting.
I will second that.
We have seconded that motion. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. The minutes from July 16th have been approved.
And I can give you an update on that resolution, 2018-005. So I gave a copy of it to the Chief Administrative Officer, Sarita Nair, and the administration is supportive of the Cable Board's review of the issue and its position on the issue. And the next thing I have to do is prepare an executive communication so that we can convey the resolution to the City Council. And so, because City Council will be working on these bills, the ordinances covering telecommunications and ordinances covering Comcast. And so it would be good to know, for them to know that at least some portion of the community supports these positions that are relevant to the ordinances, net neutrality.
Thank you very much. Item 2, can you fill us in, Jane, on how the franchise renewal contracts are going?
So the
The microphones, are they working, your microphones?
Yeah, they're not working.
They're not working?
Check, check,
Not
check.
working. Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't want to eat them, but we may have to.
Yeah.
Thanks.
They're not monitored.
Okay, thank you, Simon. All right, so we met on July 16th, and now it's August 7th, right? And so there hasn't been really any change of position between the city and Comcast at this point. We are still, I would say that we, knock on wood, have reached almost a complete agreement on the Consumer Bill of Rights. But we still have a lot of work to do on the PIC channel and on the INET. However, there's a meeting tomorrow with the Department of Technology and Innovation on the fiber agreement. And we are going to be talking with Comcast, I hope, at the same time about the fiber agreement having some provisions for net neutrality. I'm not sure we're going to get it, but this is where I'm pushing that this issue comes up. And that we have to discuss with Comcast what we mean by net neutrality and what they mean by net neutrality, and see if there's some part of that the meanings of net neutrality that we can actually write into the agreement that has some meaning.
Okay.
And obviously place some obligations on
Right.
Comcast.
Right.
That's what we want to do.
Okay.
And so there's that. So we're still working on keeping the PIC channels. We made a counter offer, which is to keep the 4 and then have a channel for regional uses, for example, Los Ranchos and Corrales, and then to have a 6th channel as a channel to grow. For example, if some schools want to start a education access channel, then we would have one ready. I'm also asking Nan to negotiate for a provision that the Comcast ordinance can be reopened for additional discussions if the city can show that there's an additional need, or there's more need for PEG channels, more than 6. So that way, if the city is losing the option of lighting up 9, instead the city has the option of 6, then we're not completely losing those opportunities, because a reopener would allow the city then to negotiate for additional channels beyond the 6, if we can show a need. So those are all in progress. We don't, I don't know. I really can't gauge how it's going to turn out, because those are hot issues for both sides.
Okay. Very good. Do you have any questions for Jane?
No, she answered it just now, like it's 6 channels thing.
Right.
So it's ongoing, right? So
Yeah.
there's nothing we can really.
So on the contract negotiations, the city has now moved from wanting all 9 to we'd like 6, one of which for sure will be expansion.
Yes, and that's fair, but the way that the city is looking at it is that back in 2001, the city was primarily looking at analog channels, and now, since 2001, the whole system's been converted to digital, and so, and then the concepts of SD and HD, standard definition, and high definition came into the picture, so to speak. And so all of those options require more bandwidth. And so the city negotiating team right now is thinking that it is palatable, it's tolerable to give up those 3, because in return the city is getting higher quality picture. And one of the objectives of public access for the city is to attract the viewership. And the thinking is that if the PEG channels are not high definition, then people will shy away and not watch them, even when they're channel surfing. So that's part of the thinking in the negotiations.
Very good. Okay.
And then on the RFP, do you want to know what's happening?
Well, yeah, that'd be great to know how that's coming along.
Okay, so in a nutshell, we thought that they would have all the proposals scored by now, but the department that's handling RFP, or whoever is, the people on the ad hoc committee, I guess, had to postpone the meeting yesterday, and so I think there's some pressure on the ad hoc committee to finish up, and I'm happy to put pressure on, for them to finish up, but I believe that that was the plan, to have that second scoring meeting and then have a recommendation. So it should be pretty close.
They already had 2 meetings, correct?
No, only one.
They met on the 18th, you said.
They met on the 18th, and then they were going to meet again on August 2nd, and that's the meeting that got
Oh,
postponed.
that was also.
Okay. On hold still. Very good. All right, let's move to item 3. Discussion on the community workshop and on net neutrality. And Jane, thank you for all your pre-work on this sucker. So appreciated.
You're welcome.
I do believe this is something that will be valuable to the citizens of Albuquerque that utilize internet, utilize cable, even through the telecom folks. But why don't you tell us more about the presenters and possible presenters?
So Professor Jake Crandall was civic-minded and energetic enough to come join us today, and he has told me that he would be willing to make a presentation, so we should have him come here and not, waste any more of his time. I'll just say very briefly that Public Knowledge is a consumer advocacy group that agreed to participate by Skype. And then I also would like to work on recruiting local advocates, local media advocates. And, we have two right here, Mike Slick and Simon Polakowski. And I don't know if you're into presentations, but Hakeem Bellamy, the Deputy Director of Cultural Services, recommended Roberta Royale from Generation Justice, and I think that's a great idea, but I haven't had a chance to call her yet. So anyway, that's a bit of a gap. And then in New Mexico, AG, I don't know, that could be kind of dry, but I talked with the one of the lawyers in that office, and he indicated that they would probably send somebody over if you all wanted.
Okay.
Somebody.
I think that would be terrific.
Okay.
Let me interject one thing real quick, and that is that as a workshop, I would almost recommend, and it may be the toughest part of putting this together, is finding someone that's for the way it is, so that we have two sides of the story. Now, personally, I think that's going to be hard, except for those that truly, Chris Donaldson.
Who? Chris Duncanson?
Duncanson.
Oh, yeah. Did you work with him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He'd be a great for the net neutrality issue. But I'm sure there might be others out there that would gain from leaving it the way it is currently. It's trying to track those down. But I think it's our job to hear both sides of the story at this hearing board. Regardless of my personal opinion,
No, I think it would be beneficial to have both sides. We can learn from both.
yes.
I'm not shy to hear all sides. I mean, that's how you make decisions properly. But, and I'm sure that, the ones that want the status quo probably say, well, here's the reason we can, present it. How do we track someone? Do you know something?
Well,
Is that,
I don't know if he'd do it, but we're in negotiations with him right now. He's the head of Comcast here locally.
how do we get him down?
Well,
Send him an invite? Can we send him an invite?
What's the question?
to get a hold of Chris Duncanson.
Yeah. Well, we're talking. It's true. He's on the negotiating team for Comcast.
Right.
So we're in touch with him for sure.
But
Would you like me to invite him to the community
when
workshop?
we get to the point where we have a date, time, and place, yeah.
Okay.
I think, or Chris can send somebody else. I mean, if he wants to bring someone in from Denver, which is their big regional area. but it might be good for him to hear the sides,
Exactly.
that people,
Goes inside.
you know.
I'm sure they know a lot of it because they hear so much of it online. But bringing them down here would be beneficial for us.
Yeah.
So that would understand all sides of it. I would like to understand all sides of it.
Sure.
Why do they want the status quo? I mean,
Sure. And another person that would be difficult to get a hold of, but would be advantageous because he is still a U.S. congressman, would be Steve Pierce. Because he was seated when this vote or didn't get voted on or brought up.
You mean in Congress?
Right, didn't they have, it went through the, it had to be approved or repealed through Congress?
No, it happened through the FCC.
Right, the FCC said they're gonna do that, but didn't the Senate have an option to repeal the FCC's decision?
Oh, yes, there was a bill to try and revive the principles of net neutrality through legislation, and it failed because the Congress right now is dominated by Republicans.
Hmm.
But they were not
Right.
voting on the same thing.
Okay,
They were voting, it's not, just from a legal perspective, that's not the way that process works.
okay,
So it was a separate legislation, but it was doing the same thing. It was kind of reviving net
Okay.
neutrality. But, the advocates pretty much realized that they were not going to be able to succeed because of the makeup of Congress right now.
right. Well, even if, then in that case, our two governor candidates, it might be a great idea to have them give us their opinions.
I think they'll show up as long as we have enough people here.
Yeah, exactly, if it gets enough press.
I mean, we know about running their gubernatorial candidates, they want the public here. They
Yeah.
don't want to talk to a silent room.
I totally agree.
So if we can advertise it properly, I think that would be my thing,
Yeah.
to advertise this thing properly.
And that it all wraps around that.
And if we could figure out a way to advertise it and maybe possibly get maybe a channel involved.
Well, I got that down in C here,
uh,
methods for marketing and
Yeah.
advertising this thing. But let's talk about a date, a time, and a place, because,
Well, and I would like to bring Mr. Cordero because, he came here, and so I don't know if he wants to stay there. Could we have him come up?
Oh, sure.
The reason I didn't make it clear, I would like him to summarize what his presentation would be, and then that would give you an idea of the shape of this workshop. To see if Professor Crandall can explain to us a little bit. He's not going to give a presentation.
no, sure.
He's just going to give you, the members of the board, an idea of what information he could present.
Thank you. Jedediah, can you come up and see if that mic's working there? And if not, we can let you in here and just talk to us this way.
Is this working okay?
No. I guess so.
If I lean a little bit more in, does it work?
It's not working. I can tell.
Come on in here and
Here. Oh, there, right there, sorry.
Use one of these.
see if it's working. Press the button.
Is this one working okay?
No, but go ahead.
Well,
The camera can hear you. We're the only two people here, so please,
Okay.
Wherever you feel comfortable, Jack, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
And thank you very much for coming to our meeting.
Yeah, truly.
And
Thank you for
And for
coming.
your offer to help us out. And we're going to do better about getting more people to come to the workshop for sure. So it will not be a wasted effort.
I think Yeah, just two things. So one is I'll definitely be willing to help as much as I can, and I know people in the computer science department and the public policy department at UNM, and I'm sure they know lots of people, so
Oh,
we can
great,
get the word out.
great.
And then the other thing is I just wanted to very briefly give you guys some ideas of what I might talk about in a presentation, and then if you have more questions or anything, I can elaborate more. So there are 4 points. I was just kind of brainstorming today, and there are 4 points that I was thinking about. So one of them, people have been talking about net neutrality for I think well over a decade, and that's about when I started doing research on global internet censorship. So when I was a graduate student, I started to look at internet censorship in China, and then I've been doing that research for over a decade now. And like 10 years ago, I would think about net neutrality and I would think, well, it's not really censorship. I mean, if one video is slower than another, that's not the same as they shut a video off. But one of the things that I've realized doing research about how other countries, especially China, but I've also looked at other countries like Iran, different parts of the world, is that it's not about shutting a video on or off. If you look at the way that they implement censorship, they're very much playing a game of quality of service, because it's impossible to really censor the internet so that people can't get to what they want. They can use VPNs, they can use Tor, they can use different kinds of things, you can tunnel through their friends. But the governments of countries that do censorship know that the real game is quality of service. That if you have to use a VPN, to get to the videos you want, and then the VPN traffic is really slow, most people are going to say, well, forget it, I'll just watch the state-sponsored news because, this is ridiculous. I watch these slow videos over VPN. The VPN goes down like every month. I'm having to pick a new VPN provider and everything. So that's the game that they're really playing when you look at the technical mechanisms that they're using. So that would be one point that I would try to make. And another example of that is in Iran. In 2009, they shut the internet off during protests, and the whole public just took to the streets and made the protests massive. So they learned their lesson. Since then, every time there's a protest in Iran, they just throttle the internet traffic. So all the internet traffic goes through Tehran, and they just say, okay, we're going to take it and we're going to cut it by a fourth, and everybody's videos are going to be slow, and people are going to sit there hitting the reset button instead of going out in the streets and protesting. So if you look at the censorship game around the world, it is about quality of service, and it's not about, I'm going to shut this video off completely. Another point that I would try to make in the presentation would be that it's more than people realize. It's especially overseas in an authoritarian regime like China, you would think, well, it's the government that decides what's censored. And one thing that we've been surprised about in our research results is that that's not the case. It's largely the companies that make the decisions. And then there's this concept in Chinese political thought called the anaconda and the chandelier. That there's like a vague threat hanging over the companies' heads, and the companies know what kinds of things the government would want censored. But it's the companies that sit down and say, this video is okay, this video is not. And one way that we've seen that is every company is censoring different things. So both of those together, the fact that it's all about quality of service and that it's largely the companies and not the governments that decide what's censored. Even in the most authoritarian regimes that we've looked at. That's what's convinced me over the last 10 years that net neutrality really is like an internet freedom issue. Because I had that model in my head, just because we don't have net neutrality doesn't mean the government can say, oh, that news website, you can't watch that one anymore. But that's not really what it's all about. Even when you look in authoritarian regimes, that's not how censorship works. And then a third point that I would touch on is, so I'm a football fan and I have DirecTV, and it's just one of the frustrations of my life. It's like Thursday night football, I didn't pay for that part of the package, so I don't get to watch Thursday night football. Monday night football worked for a while, but then it was just a promotion, and now I can't watch Monday night football unless I pay more. And that's just the reality of having satellite TV. But that's the way that net neutrality advocates are worried the internet would look like without net neutrality, is that you could watch certain news channels and watch their videos, but if you want a good quality for other news channels, that's part of a different package. And we've actually seen this. So there's on Wikipedia, on the article about net neutrality, there's a screen cap from Portugal, where it's like, if you want to pay this much for the internet, you can use WhatsApp. And if you want to pay this much for the internet, then you can use FaceTime. And it has different pricing structures for different internet applications. And what scares me about that is just one of the areas of my research is chat applications, so WhatsApp and WeChat and things like that, and then how advocates or how journalists and activists use those. And we work with trainers in places like Tibet. And the trainers that we talk to, they say things like, in China, there's dozens and dozens of chat apps you could use, and maybe half of them are blocked, so you can't use WhatsApp at all, for example. But there are other ones you could use besides WeChat. And we know from reverse engineering the application that WeChat takes everything you do and then uploads it to a server in Beijing. So we tell the trainers in Tibet, like, you should tell people stop using WeChat. But WeChat actually works, like in terms of quality of service. If you walk around, there's very remote networks in Tibet. WeChat actually works, nothing else works. Like you try to do a video call or anything, it's not going to work, just because of quality of service issues. And what app you use really matters. So when you're talking about journalism and activism and things that are important to a democratic society, I don't think it's okay to just say, well, you can't use WhatsApp, but that's okay because you could use this other one. And then a fourth thing, and this is more related to my teaching than my research. So I teach a networking class. And as part of our societal impacts that we're supposed to cover, we talk about net neutrality. And one of the examples I give students, just to kind of argue that it's more nuanced than just you should treat all packets equally, is like BitTorrent. The way the internet is designed, every connection is treated equally. But there's nothing stopping one person from having 100 connections. So, there's valid concern that you have to protect that one customer from the other customer that's opening 100 connections instead of one. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is that the rules that were removed for net neutrality were already a compromise. So protecting your network in that way was already allowed in those rules. So it's not like the net neutrality advocates had their way and then those rules got removed and now people that are against net neutrality have their way. It was already a compromise, and it was the compromise that got removed. So those are the four things that I thought about. I don't know if you guys have other thoughts or questions or anything. So.
I have a question for Professor. Give me personally, I'm not sure if there are base of knowledge on this. I'd like to know where this term originated from and how this concept even came about. I understand some parts of it, but there's so many moving parts to it. Like, how does it look from the outside looking into the United States? I mean, because we're globally connected, right? So you understand, how does this thing look when you, to me, it's like, I'm looking at it from a global network point of view, and I'm saying, we're dealing with China, we're dealing with Russia, we're dealing with all this, outside entities. So where does this thing first originated from? That's my first question. And second is, how does it affect the global network system? How does that work?
Okay.
Is that was that clear?
Let me know if this answers your question. So most of my expertise is not really in like the legal aspects of net neutrality or historical or anything. It's more internet censorship around the world and then the technical aspects. But I can try to answer your question. In terms of technically, net neutrality was originally known as the end-to-end principle, and it was built into the internet as the internet developed. So it started as the ARPANET, and then through the 70s, and then in the 80s it became the NSFNet, and then eventually it got turned over and it privately became the internet. And it was a technical decision. It didn't have anything to do with internet freedom or consumer rights or anything. It was a technical decision that the smarts of the network should be on the outside of the network. So if I'm congesting the network, I'm sending too much traffic and the network's getting congested, I should back off. And from a technical perspective, that's easier to implement than having the router decide like, oh, JED is sending too much traffic. I'm going to start dropping JED's traffic. Because what happens is I'm using, say that router's 3 hops away from me, so I go through 3 other routers before I even get to that router making that decision. I'm wasting the resources of those 3 routers, and then the 4th router is dropping the packets, but I'm still wasting resources. So it's a lot easier if the smarts are on the edge of the network, and I say, okay, I'm wasting resources all over the network. I need to back off. I need to be the one to stop sending so many packets. So that was what technically got built into the internet, and then the middle of the network was just dumb. It just forwarded packets, and if it got overloaded, it just started randomly dropping them without thinking about where they were coming from. And then the endpoint, the ends of the network would say, okay, my packets are being dropped. That means that I'm using the network too much, so I need to back off. And the way the math works out, it's some pretty complicated control theory and everything, but you can make the math work out so that if people follow a protocol to back off, the network can be dumb, but you can still avoid all that congestion and everything. And then I think when the internet became private and people started using it for journalism and things like that, they benefited from that technical decision. And then later, when the internet, became privatized to the point where people wanted to start thinking about different pricing models and everything, I think that's when people realized that was an important property to have for other than technical reasons, and that's when the idea of net neutrality was born. I would imagine. I'm not an expert on the history of it, but just technically,
Those
that's
are
how
my
it came
questions,
forth.
and I'm sorry I'm asking you that. Because I understood the internet, the way I understood it was, internet was created by the Pentagon. It was used inter-government agencies. That's what the usage was initially. And then a portion of it was handed out to the private sector, correct? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, it went from, a government idea. So ARPA, wanted a network that if there was a nuclear attack, it would just route around. So, and then it became kind of a research network. So people at Los Alamos or wherever, and even universities realized, we can use this to pass our research data around and use it for research. So then that's when it transitioned from ARPANET to NSFNet, and it was research, and then it got privatized from a research network. So it didn't go ARPA to privatization, it went ARPA to research to privatization.
And they're still separate, right? They're not together. ARPA and private are they're on 2 different layers. Because the internet that we see or we use is only 10%. The majority of the internet is not even accessible to the public, which is what we refer to as the deep web. So now what my question is, that little slice that they gave us, how are we regulating them? How did this term even come about, this net neutrality thing? And there's some cobwebs there. I think I may be asking some questions going into probably the historical aspects of it and stuff. I understand some portions of it because I know how the internet came about. I understand most of the internet is not accessible to people, which is what we refer to as the deep web. They have to use certain browsers to get into it. But the 10%, that small layer that we are accessing, how do we access it, and who decided who controls it and all that? These are the questions that I have. And I don't know if you can find some of these questions out for us, because I think it will help me understand the whole concept of net neutrality. This is where I get stuck, because I just need, you understand the basis of my knowledge is I understood how the internet came about and who was using it, how the government decided to give us a small slice of it. So we're using a very small portion of the internet accessible to people. The majority of the internet is not accessible to people, which is what we call deep web. You can't even use it through a regular browser. You have to have certain browsers like Tor and, am I right? Tor is one of them, I think.
So Tor, anybody can download Tor and use Tor. And Tor, that's typically referred to as the dark web, but the Tor project doesn't like that term.
They refer to it as the deep web. I think that's what they call it. Dark web is something that later, this is a newer invention, this term that just came about.
I've heard the term deep web, but I'm not that familiar with it.
Deep web, you can't access it through general browsers. You have to have some. So this whole concept of net neutrality, there is other issues there. That's why I wanted to hear the opposing side of why they say keep it the way it is. I would love to hear that. So if you could give us some information as to how things are regulated, probably we could understand why things are, you know, because I have some questions there, and I think I may need to go extremely technical to get some of those answers. Yeah. I'm not understanding it because there's some, you know, clarifications that I'm requiring. But if you can give us anything, it would be helpful. I mean, I really appreciate your time on this, you know, to come out and talk to us. If we could get more people involved in this somehow, or possibly advertise, because it does affect people.
Mm-hmm.
It affects all of us.
Absolutely.
We need to understand. And if,
Would you like some more?
you want some more?
Okay.
So I think we took a lot of professors' time, especially with my questions. I think a lot of.
So how are your students related to this? I guess they're younger, right? And are they relating to the issue of net neutrality in a consumer way or in a very technical way, the way you're talking about it?
I'd say both. So I had about 60 students in my networking class last semester. And actually, no, the fall semester, so the semester before last. And net neutrality was a big portion of the class just because, you know, the FCC was just about to drop the rules and it was in the news, so I thought it would be something interesting to cover. And I think I let the students pick what subtopics of it they wanted to present about. And, you know, a lot of them were, you know, not just thinking about it technically, but also, you know, in terms of national politics or whatever. So there was a whole wide range of different student interests in it. But I'd say they were pretty energetic about it. Like it was something that they were very interested in.
So what were they worried about? How it would affect their lives? The doing away of net neutrality.
I think a big one is the applications, like the stories about if you were a customer of a particular ISP and you wanted to use FaceTime. There was a time when FaceTime was being throttled so that you get a very good picture, so that you would have to buy that competitor, you know, the competitive product or something, and use something else. And I think they identified that with that, and then they also, you know, from the global perspective, because we also in the class cover a lot of internet censorship because that's my research area. So they kind of identify it within those terms. Because that's one of the things that we talk about is countries like Kazakhstan, where it's, you know, you can have free access to the internet in Kazakhstan if you pay a lot for it. And then if you pay the normal amount, then it's just like you can use the Kazakhstani Facebook, which is heavily filtered, and you can't talk about the government or anything. And I mean, you can criticize the government on Facebook all you want in Kazakhstan, but to get that kind of access, you have to pay the ISP quite a bit more.
So you would say mostly your students understand what net neutrality is and the problems related to it.
Yeah,
They have some general understanding.
And we mostly, they on their own do the research on the history and the legal aspects and everything. In the class, we cover the technical aspects with the end-to-end argument and quality of service and those kind of technical aspects. And then they go on their own and do research to give presentations about the history of net neutrality and all that. So.
Any further questions for the professor?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it so much.
So appreciate you coming.
So we're going to have to, do you think that you'll set a date and time today?
Well, I know we want to do this, or we'd like to do it before the contract is negotiated or finalized.
Yes.
And it has to be finalized by October 1st, or what happens at October 1st?
Well, it's possible that this city's negotiating team and Comcast will agree to another extension. And it happens in other cities too. that these agreements, the negotiations go on for a while. And so that's possible. But in some ways, I feel optimistic that the city of Albuquerque will reach an agreement with Comcast by October 1. And this would be the opportunity of the cable board to have input in this process and I think that would be a reason to bring Chris Duncanson over here or other people from Comcast, because the city supports net neutrality, right? So there's no question about that, because the mayor signed it and we have put it in we put the general principles in the Comcast our proposed ordinance. And so for Chris Duncanson or some other people from Comcast to come to the cable board meeting, there's no risk or there's no danger that he is going to think that the city hasn't made up its mind and that somehow we're going to go with what Comcast wants, because we've already told him that we support net neutrality. The question though is, how do we implement that? And listening to Professor Crandall talk about the technical kind of features of net neutrality versus not net neutrality, I'm still not sure how to translate that into the obligations of Comcast. Mm-hmm. And because what we have in the ordinance, the proposed ordinance, is the language from places like Montana and Washington State and the state of Montana, where the governors have said that they will only do business with companies that support net neutrality. So then it follows from that the state of Washington, the state of Montana will only credit those companies that don't. And then here comes the list, and I don't know. I don't know how that translates into obligation. So no throttling, no paid prioritization, no blocking websites and things like that. And I had really thought about net neutrality as a separate, that the concepts behind net neutrality are separated between First Amendment and consumer. But now that I've heard Professor Crandall talk about it, I see that it's much more related than I had thought that they were. And so that's an issue, and I think I'm going to put out a question to the National Association of Telecommunications Officials and Advisors and ask, have any of them actually negotiated services agreements with telecom companies that incorporated obligations on the, a company that would promote net neutrality and open internet? So I'm not sure what companies have actually done. So Professor Crandall, could I ask you, if the city put in the Comcast, either the service agreement or the ordinance, that Comcast could not throttle, I think I brought it here, and couldn't do paid prioritization, what would that really mean? Like, can you explain? Like, what would they have to do if we held them to that? And I'll find this language. We just copied it from Washington State and Montana.
Yeah, so I mean, they wouldn't have to do anything really. It's what they couldn't do, which is the kind of like pricing structures.
Okay.
And they couldn't throttle one service versus another because they prefer that service, because it's one of their business partners or something like that. But I mean, the internet grew up basically for technical reasons with net neutrality. And then it was later that people wanted to add pricing structures to it, or either pricing structures or say because we're, this ISP and we partner with this application for doing video chat, the other applications that use video chat, we're going to make them slower so that our product is faster if you're using our network. And, wanting to do those kinds of things is what, it's net neutrality is stopping people from doing those kinds of things, not making them do something that they weren't already doing to make the network work. So. And the rules that were in place until recently, there are ways that people can abuse the network. So there's like BitTorrent, or Google has been caught just dumping a bunch of data without, thinking about if they're congesting the network. And there's a lot of things like that, but the rules didn't stop the ISPs from protecting their network. So that's why I said the rules were already a compromise. They weren't like exactly what net neutrality advocates wanted. It was a compromise that said you can still protect your network. People can't just dump their content or do whatever to your network with you having no power over it. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying the answer to your question is I don't think they would need to do anything that they weren't doing because net neutrality was already built into the internet.
Okay, and that's something else that, okay, so what our proposed ordinance says is that any federal law, FCC rulings, orders, or regulations are either currently in effect or will be in effect in the future, notwithstanding, that means in spite of that, the parties agree that in the interest of developing a network that efficiently and fairly serves the city and its residents and businesses, the franchisee, that's Comcast, shall not, with respect to any customer, block lawful, this is the first one, block lawful content, applications, services, or non-harmful devices subject to reasonable network management that is disclosed to the customer. 2, throttle, impair, or degrade lawful internet traffic on the basis of internet content, application, or service, or use of a non-harmful device subject to reasonable network management. 3, engage in prioritization, or 4, unreasonably interfere with or unreasonably disadvantage the end user's ability to select, access, and use broadband internet access service or lawful internet content, or interfere with edge providers' ability to make lawful content, application, services, or devices. Again, we copied that from Washington State, and I think, like Mr. Haqqani talked, we have a general understanding of what that means, but we're not sure what obligations would be placed on Comcast. And so you're saying they wouldn't have to do anything. If they agreed to this, they wouldn't have to change their behavior? Is that what you're saying?
Well, unless they're already doing things that they weren't allowed to do per the FCC rules before. But in terms of, what all that language means.
Yes.
So it's all about making decisions. Everything on the internet gets broken up into packets, and the packets get routed around. And then, you're Comcast and you're configuring your routers to make decisions about those packets. So you can take packets and you can, send them faster before other packets, or you can decide which packets to drop if you have too many of them. So you have to make all these decisions, and you can make those decisions based on, what's going on with the network. So like if somebody is flooding your router, you can say, as a quality of service measure, I can't let you send all this traffic through my router. I'm going to throttle you and let other people have, a fair amount of the bandwidth, for example. And then you could also look at what's in those packets. Within the content and everything, you can tell like this flow of packets is somebody talking on FaceTime, and this flow of packets is somebody talking on Skype. So that language says you can do the former, so you can protect your network. You can say somebody's using BitTorrent, and they're taking all the bandwidth away from their neighbor. And so I can distinguish between those kinds of packets and say, if you're using the network unfairly using BitTorrent, I can throttle your traffic. but you can't, based on the content, do throttling. So you can't say, okay, you're using FaceTime, and Apple is one of my business partners, so you get more bandwidth than this guy over here using Skype.
Okay.
So all of that language basically boils down to just making that distinction of there's things that you can do and then there's things that you can't do in terms of how you make those decisions about which packets get priority.
So, do you think a company like Comcast would be able to agree to something like this? Because, you know, they do have a fair amount of capacity right now, and so how often do they have to do things like that? If they have enough bandwidth, wouldn't they not even have that issue come up?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too versed in the business side of it, but I assume that, you know, the first thing that I mentioned where you're protecting your network against people that are dumping a lot of traffic on it, that's pretty standard. So, I mean, that's you just have to do that on the internet to, you know, throttle certain services that use too much bandwidth or something.
That's that reasonable management language,
Yeah.
right? That's the kind of escape valve for that.
So I assume they've always done that, and then there was nothing under net neutrality rules that said they couldn't do that. I think the thing that they would not be allowed to do is, you know, to look at packets other than like it's the health of the network or, you know, which users are using their unfair share of bandwidth or anything. But when they start making distinctions like this traffic is the content is being served by this company, and that you know, it's being served by this other company. Those are the distinctions that they weren't allowed to make when net neutrality rules were in place. And that.
So it's possible for a telecom company, you know, or a cable company, to make a decision to do that kind of throttling just to make money, not because they have aversion to any content. I mean, like they could be agnostic or like indifferent to the content, but they just want to have an excuse to charge more money. So that's an aspect of net neutrality being done away with, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they could have, you know, it could be, you know, they partner with that company that serves that content, or they have a competing product or whatever that's having them make the decision about how to prioritize packets.
Okay, so this is our dilemma in negotiating this, and of course we're talking about this in public, but the dilemma is that Comcast will not want to give up that revenue generating opportunity. Is that the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that kind of the national politics of net neutrality, a lot of it is that there's a lot of money to be made on the content. And of course the content providers are making lots of money, so Google's making lots of money, Facebook's making lots of money, the people that provide content are making lots of money, and the network providers that sit in between the customers and the content providers want a share of that money. So there's so much money going around, they can get a share of that if they can say, well, somebody has to pay us. Either the customer has to pay for premium service, or Facebook has to give us money so that their traffic reaches the customer or something. We're the ones in the middle, we should be making the money. I mean, that's just my opinion.
Oh, sure.
But I think that is a big financial reason why net neutrality was repealed. So.
From a practical standpoint, then, currently Comcast says product A of the internet is 28 megs down, okay? So would it be safe to say that now they'll have to say unrestricted 28 megs? Or even if they start throttling back, is 28 megs 28 megs?
So if the consumer buys a 28 meg download link, then, you know, Comcast would be able to, you know, look at packets in terms of what's congesting the network and everything. but they wouldn't be able to say, well, this is Netflix and this is YouTube. And so your 28 megs, you paid for Netflix, but not for YouTube. And something I think that is important is that a lot of it is about the last mile. So there's the internet, but really the content, most of the content, and especially the high bandwidth content, is cached locally. So there's a server, I think it's up on I-25 somewhere, where, you know, if you're watching a Netflix movie or YouTube video or something, it's cached there. And it's only making its way through Albuquerque internet to you. Well, most of the content that people are watching isn't actually coming across the internet just for them. It's cached locally. And so, you know, a lot of the attempts for various companies to control that content and make the money and everything is about the last mile. So.
Okay. Any other questions?
I'm good.
Thank you again, Jen.
Thank you very much.
Okay, a possible date, which it's late. We have, not late tonight, but late in September. We have a meeting on the 11th. Then the Saturdays, and I would assume we'd want to do a Saturday, or is this something we'd want to do after hours on a weekday? Thoughts?
I think weekdays probably.
You think 6 o'clock on a weeknight?
Yeah. I mean, we'll have a little better response on the weekdays.
Then a weekend?
That is, yeah. Most people are not enough kind of remote on the weekend.
Okay.
I mean, I'm saying specifically for
Right.
that. I could be here on the weekend, but the whole idea of the workshop is to engage.
Sure.
And so weeknights, I think, sounds more logical to me at this point.
Okay. So we would shoot for a weeknight. And we probably want to do it after our September 11th meeting. I'm thinking a Thursday night. You know, Monday nights, people are coming back to work for the week. Fridays we're already into the weekend.
Wednesday or Thursday.
So Wednesday or Thursday night would probably be our best
I
bet.
think so between the two.
So that would be 19th, 20th, 26th, or 27th
Yep.
of September.
19, 20, 26, 27. To get the information out to people that we need to get information out to, i.e. public, i.e. news departments, i.e. UNM, students, i.e. City employees, i.e. anybody that has internet or uses internet, is going to take a minimum of 2 weeks once everything is written or produced. That's my sensibility there, and background in marketing and advertising. And then you've got to just hit them and continue to hit them. So I don't know what that looks like right now. Certainly if we can get one news station to talk to us about this, the other ones will fall in place. In regards to
You
a
only
press.
have to convince one of them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's your problem.
We need to get a press release written that's, we can go to the papers. I'd even say the Alibi. I don't know what their printing timetable is, but you know, along with the Journal, the Santa Fe New Mexican even. So this is the key to making this workshop a success.
I have a question. I think, and maybe Professor could answer that. Is there a way we could involve the university and collaborate with the university, having to do with the workshop? Is that, could be, how's that going to work?
What's that?
Well, I'm asking you, and then I wanted to ask the
Yeah,
professor.
for sure. Yes,
Could that collaboration work?
yes.
So, I have a question, Professor. I was just asking Jane, how would it work if we were to collaborate with the university as far as engaging either the students, the faculty, so we can get individuals involved. The idea of the workshop is to engage the community.
So I mean, I guess I would just try different avenues. So one would be the faculty within my department. I think they'd be really interested in this, and they'd be very helpful. And I know, people in other departments. So yeah, both faculty and students. And then there are ways of doing announcements at UNM. So I would talk to them about it, and then especially if there's the opportunity for UNM to get some press, like one of our faculty is presenting this workshop or something, then there's a press office that would want to put it on the website and everything.
So how would we go about doing that? If we wanted to engage the university with, say, the cable board putting on the workshop, how does that?
So I'd be willing to help a lot. I think first I would email the faculty in my department, and then try to use the social network to get people, and then I would talk to the department that does press for UNM.
Daily Local?
No, it's I can't remember what they're called, but they run UNM.edu, and then they make videos, and so they they want the community to know that UNM is doing things and involve the community and everything. So I'm sure they would want to do a video, and then I would try to get their help to email the whole student body, because it's not like any professor could just email the whole student body of UNM, but if it's something that I think that they would be the right office to ask, like how could we do that, how could we get that done, so that we can just email the entire student body and say there's this workshop coming out that. And there's also the president and the provost and the deans all have their own weekly messages that they send out to all students and faculty and everything. So I'm sure that we could convince them to mention it in their messages.
Engage the university. This is what we can engage the university and discuss possibly the venue where we could do this, because we would require a place like this or something. I think this should be sufficient. I mean, if you have any thoughts on that, let us know. But I would like to engage the university. That way, I think we have a better response that way. Because they have ways of engaging people that we kind of don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think collaborating with UNM might be very beneficial.
Sure.
Extremely.
I like that.
If you have any thoughts on that, just let Jane know. That way we can kind of discuss the venue and how we can go about
Yeah, Jed, we really appreciate your help on that, helping to get things started. Again, we don't have a specific date. We know it'll be after the 11th, and most likely a Wednesday or Thursday evening. And that's about as far as we can go just yet.
I think that you could set a date and we could work toward it. Because it's hard to organize something
If we
without
don't have a date?
Yeah, because Brooke Zeno is very energetic, and she wrote, already sent out kind of a department email. But they already went that step. And she said to me, I'll send out another one when you have a date.
19th and Wednesday. That way we can give them a date. She's right. That was, there's something to work with.
Yes.
Rather than just saying we're having
Definitely.
this workshop. So,
Well, the 19th is sticking out.
I'll make 19 work if you can do 19. And then
And
the professor can let us know, you know, if any way you could kind of help us with
the 19th at 6 p.m.?
yeah, that is 6 p.m.
This is September 19th?
Yes,
Is
yes.
that okay with you?
That gives us enough time to get the message out and work channels. And it should probably be said that it's a 2-hour workshop, that it might go longer. But if we start taking questions after the board, the panel presents whatever they're going to present, and then we would take questions from the audience, it could be very lengthy. So 19th, September 19th, 6 to 8, or whatever it goes to.
So in terms of the presentations, would these be like slides? Will there be?
Could be, if you have a presentation, I really believe that to start it off, and we had mentioned this before, about the FCC's video about their decision to repeal net neutrality originally. So we'll probably need to cut that back because we don't need to spend half an hour watching the FCC board explain their decisions, but to get to the gist of it. So yes, we'll need, slides are always great. Absolutely.
So I'm thinking maybe a panel now. Let me get an advocate. I think that's, I don't know what the board members, what Mr. Hakami and Mr. White think. You know, to me, if we're calling community workshop, we really have to make it relevant. And you know, what Professor Crandall, what you're saying, I don't know, is it hard for people to understand? Because I work in telecom, and it's a little bit challenging for me. And I have read technical articles so I can understand the difference, you know, between analog and digital transmission. But I really have to listen hard. I'd probably get a C if I were in your class.
I mean, that's definitely something I could work on, and especially, I think the non-technical aspects of my research, I think, are a lot easier to present than technical things.
So, but the heart of what you told us today is very helpful. You know, it's just explaining how the technology links up with some impact on people. You know, that's what we want. We want to get to the end stage, which is we understand the technology, but what does this mean to me? How does this affect me day to day? And I think that you did that, but if you could make it a little easier to understand, because these are not college students necessarily, you know. We want everybody to come to this. And then we have an activist who then takes it to the next step where, you know, we can translate it more. And maybe just the two of you, because like, we don't want to go on and on, because people is like, what? You know, this is too much, I can't. You know, it's like, you know, it's like, sometimes when I talk, believe it or not, about my cases, whatever, my friends say, Jane, how do you keep your head from exploding? You know, and so, it's, you know, one of my friends said that. It's like,
I was asking that myself just the other night. How does Jane do that?
So we don't want a workshop that causes people to have that reaction. We want them to
We want it to
become
be helpful,
aware and-
helpful to the community, and that's the whole point.
what's that?
I think it should be helpful to the community.
Yes.
Most people don't even understand the concept of net neutrality, let
Right,
alone understand
exactly.
the nuts and bolts of it.
It's got to be just a simple journalistic aspect. Who, what, where, when, and why.
But it's so important. We need to understand this. That's how the corporations can take advantage of people, because there's an unlevel playing field, and this is one example of that.
Yeah.
We have to level it out. That's what we have to do with this workshop.
Jane
So
for
Mike is
president.
holding his head. He
I
doesn't,
nominate
you know,
Jane for
I know.
president. And, okay,
All right.
I'm sorry.
It always gets to that part in the meeting.
All right,
Did
so-
I put public comment there?
Well, tentatively, did we get the point that it's September 19th, 6 to 8, so that Jed can investigate the possibility of folks helping us from getting UNM to be a part of that. And we can discuss, I had written down format of this workshop, and we can get into that individual email back and forth and get an idea of what's going on that. As regards to the marketing and advertising, yes, we need Jed. Does the city have a staff in PR that could write a press release if we gave them enough information?
The city has a communications office, so I should have called her already about this, so I'll call her
Okay,
and discuss how to get this, how to help the cable board get this information out.
that would be great. And if she needs help, if she needs help, but, you know, like the head of communications would need my help, but if she wants some ideas in regards to the what goes in that press release, I'd be happy to talk with her.
So do the members have like a strong inclination at this point, whether to have it in the city building
Mhm.
or out somewhere else in the community? I think that's an important issue that you need to address pretty soon.
Well, I know that this is just offered if we have presenters, because they're not presenting to us unless they were up here and presenting to them. So this room has its advantages, but not necessarily is perfect for our situation. UNM's continuing ed building has a great auditorium that might be possible. There are also many other lecture halls at UNM that are wired for AV. That would be really terrific.
Okay, so you're saying not the city.
Is this, the options are this room then, and
9th floor,
that's not enough room.
okay,
That's my guess.
all right. All right, so we'll look around for a place
Okay.
and in the community. Okay,
That's,
so I think you should make a
Free.
motion.
that's free.
Yeah, that's free. I think that you should make a motion, just to be safe, that you're gonna have this community workshop.
Okay. I move that we produce a community workshop on net neutrality for September 19th from 6 to 8 with multiple panel members to aid in discussing the for and against net neutrality.
All right, I forgot that part, okay. So it would be Professor Crandall, an activist, and Comcast. Okay, I think that would be plenty.
And I would second that motion.
All in favor of this community workshop on net neutrality, say aye. Aye. It passes, motion passes. So we will begin the process of building this workshop for September 19th. Okay, now we're moving forward. Jane, the last portion here is item 5 in regards to the third-party testing program. Have you talked to IT?
No, could I please ask you to defer that because I didn't have a chance to look on it?
Okay,
All right.
so let's, item 5 will be moved to our next meeting. Okay, we have, Simon, would you like to come and talk to us?
Yeah, I have a few comments and requests.
Simon,
I'm
would you
sorry
like
to-
You want to step up over here? And you can even sit down.
Oh, that's okay. I'm sorry to see that the third member is not here again, and that kind of disturbs me. Also, I agree with Mr. White that all opinions should be heard, and that's why I believe in public access. No one should be told, like I was told by a former employee of the present management of public access, I will decide what will be on television. And, concerning the internet, with committee member McConaughey, I bought at a library sale about the Alternet. So I believe there is literature out there about how the internet was first established. I'm sorry to say that if I had this, I would be most agreeable to lend it to you, but I lent it to somebody who's disappeared. I have a couple of requests. First of all, I know that an ad hoc committee meets, and I was wondering if there are minutes to this ad hoc committee that are available for the public, so the public can read what goes on, or if it's recorded. And I was wondering if I could get an opinion from, or a statement from the city legal or someone, does it comply with the Open Meetings Act of open government? Because I'd be interested in hearing what's discussed. And I also have a request on compliance. What constitutes contractual compliance in management of public access? How this is determined if a contractor or management is in compliance with their contract, and they've fulfilled their obligations. And I also wanted to know what is underwriting a program and what is advertising, and where does underwriting stop and advertising begins? Because I'm not positive, but I thought that advertising was discouraged over the public access waves. But because today I spoke with somebody who said, "Oh, if you get back on public access, I'd be willing to underwrite your, be an underwriter." And I don't know exactly what I can say to this person to say if I did become a producer in the future. Would I have to have a statement saying, well, that this person gave money and paid for production costs, equipment? Would I have to bring something itemized at the end of the year or quarterly to show that, well, have all these underwriters, and this is what I use the money that's given to me in return for underwriting, that it's going for equipment, material, and so on. I wonder if the city requests things like that. So I'm interested in those things, and that's why I've come to you, because you're the cable board. And yesterday I went in front of city council, I was down here, and I asked them about the ad hoc committee, and I asked them where I could go. Again, if it's recorded, if there are minutes, if I could see what is discussed and how it's discussed. And, just as a concerned citizen, and if this was in compliance with open government. So those are the things I've come to ask you about today. And I'm very interested in this net neutrality. I think it's a big discussion. And again, I'd like to reiterate, I agree with Mr. White that we should hear all opinions. And I've always thought that that's why we have public access. This is for people like myself who unable, I don't have the means to go into commercial television. I see paid programming on commercial TV, but they're selling a product. And I know on public access you're not supposed to sell a product, but it's a great place for somebody to state what they believe in, they think, or they want to show to the public at large. And so, that's why I've come this evening to ask these questions and to make these requests. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
There are no other members in the audience that would like to make comments. So,
Next meeting.
okay. Items for next meeting. Item 6, as we mentioned, item 5 will be moved to next meeting. I suggest we also discuss adding internet to the hearing board's scope of discussion.
Yes, I think that's important. I think the internet is very important because everything is converged. And we've been saying this over and over. I think it's time to act on that.
I believe another item certainly should be the workshop and how far we've gotten. Again, Comcast cable franchise renewal contract needs to be discussed. Please see if Nan can be here for that.
Okay.
Again, I want to hear any updates on the RFP for the tape channels. And I think that covers it. You have any other issues?
I think that's, well, the internet is what we were talking about, and then we already spoke about
Okay.
the university being involved with this.
I think that was a terrific idea. I move that this meeting be adjourned.
I second that.
All in favor of adjourning this meeting, say aye.
Aye.
This meeting is now adjourned.
That is one.